Finally, for the first time in a while, we finally have a new Dior Backstage highlighter palette. I can't wait to review this for you guys. And then for the first time in not a while, we have yet another purple tone Dior Backstage eyeshadow palette. But don't worry, friends, I have comparisons for you guys today, and I'm going to be doing 2 looks with both of these palettes in natural light. They're swatches. We're going to use all of the shades. I'm going to give you my completely honest thoughts on if these are worth picking up this holiday season. So without further ado, let's dive in. Real quick, because I know I'm going to get questions about this, it doesn't say on either of these boxes that these palettes are limited edition, but I just want to warn you guys, whenever Dior Backstage comes out with a new eyeshadow palette, and then maybe this will also apply to the highlighter palette, it doesn't stick around for long. It's usually limited edition, so I just want to say that up front. If you want either of these, I would probably pick them up sometime this year, sooner rather than later. A lot of times they do sell out, and it doesn't say limited edition, but history repeats itself, guys. Usually they disappear from the site, so I just want to mention that. Neither of these palettes have any fragrance, and they also do not have any talc. Let's kick things off with the Celestial Purple eyeshadow palette. I'll show you guys some daylight close-ups and swatches right here. This palette is going to be a mixture of neutrals, but there's also some pops of color and some deeper shades to create a little bit more depth. You can see from the swatches that this formula, it is not super intensely pigmented, and that is pretty typical of the Dior Backstage line. So just want to put that out there. These are going to give you a little bit more of like a softer look if you're new to this formula. It's not going to be like a Pat McGrath or Natasha Denona. It's Dior, so it is going to be a little bit more subtle, and you can see it's structured in such a way where you have kind of like a row of neutrals at the top. If you just wanted to create a very simple, I guess you could call it everyday type of look, you certainly could go in with those shades. Then we have a row of purples from light to dark, and then finally down at the bottom we have a row of kind of like cooler tones from light to dark. There's a silver, there's this kind of icy blue topper shade, and then there is this deeper navy velvet shade. There really is only one matte shade in this palette, and it is that deep navy shade. Although I feel like this deep purple shade kind of feels like a matte, but it says satin on the back of the component. So it's supposed to be a satin, but these are the 2 shades that are going to give you the depth out of all the ones in the palette. This palette, unlike some of the other ones that Dior has launched in the past, it does come with this kind of like creamy metallic shade. And this particular one is called Icy Blue. So it just adds like a nice little, kind of like a nice little touch on top of the look, which I'm gonna show you in the demo in just a second. I'm gonna show you 2 looks that I created with this palette. And for look number 1, I utilized the cooler tone shades, which are these right here. I really like the way that this look came out. I wanna do something that was a little bit lighter, brighter, frostier, maybe like more of a day look, but also incorporated a little bit of the color that is present in this palette. And so I started off with the lilac shade. This is a really pretty shade. It's not as bright as you think it's going to be because it looks kind of vibrant in the pan, but once it goes onto the eyes, it's a really beautiful kind of ethereal satin shade. Great way to wear color, but if you want something maybe a little bit like less intimidating, softer for every day, once again, it's Dior, so it's not gonna be like hyper pigmented. I went into the silver shade and I applied that more so to the inner half of the eye, just to brighten everything up. This is a great, just kind of like neutral. You could use this as a one and done. I also use the pearly white just to kind of brighten up the inner corner even more. A lot of these palettes have these very kind of pearly, shimmery white shades, and they pretty much are always amazing for an inner corner highlight. You also could use that as like a one and done all over the lid. I also went into the deep blue matte shade and I used that as a liner, just kind of winging it out. I do find that this matte, it's not as pigmented as I would like. I did feel like I had to kind of dig into the pan just a little bit more than I would have wanted to. So I would probably recommend like wetting your brush just to pick up a little bit more and create a crisper line if you are going to be using this as a liner. It worked, like it went on and I thought it looked beautiful, but I did kind of wish that that was a little bit more pigmented. And then finally, as a topper, I went into the icy blue shade. I like the way that this layers on top of the other colors in the palette. This particular shade feels a little bit creamier than the other formulas that are in this palette. Like it says shimmer, just like some of the other ones right here, but it does feel creamier and has a little bit more of like a metallic finish. And this shade as well also has a little bit of kind of a sparkly shift. I feel like it's a nice touch for something that's kind of more of a holiday palette. I popped on some mascara, and this is look number 1. Comment down below, let me know what you think. Is this a look you would wear? I really like the way that this look came out. I like that it's a little bit frosty, it's a little bit colorful, very brightening, very illuminating, but it still feels rather wearable, at least for me. I would wear this out during the day. I like the wing liner, the contrast of the navy with the silver and the lilac. I would have liked the navy shade, like I said, to be a bit more pigmented, but I made it work and I like the way that it looks in the end. And then look number 2 is actually the look that I have on my eyes today. I wanted to create something that still utilized the purples in the palette, but maybe was a little bit more of like a classic feel. So I used primarily these 4 shades, and then I dipped into these brighter ones for just like a little bit of final touches and highlighting. I first started off with the more vibrant purple in the palette. Once again, it's not gonna be this like super intense magenta lilac shade. It's Dior. It's good if you want to play around with color, but you want something a little bit more subtle. And then for the inner half of the eye, I use the champagne shade. Dior is calling this a coral on the back of the packaging. Like, it's not a coral, guys. It's just like a basic sandy beige. But that being said, it's a really easy everyday shade. This is something that I would use as like a one and done if I was in a rush and I didn't have the time to apply like 6 different shadows to my eyes, which honestly, that happens more than you would think. Then I dipped into the deeper brown shade and I just used that on the outer part of the eye to build up a little bit more depth. You're not gonna get the true tone of the brown, I realized that, by layering it over the purple, but you guys can see you can mix these shades together and they don't get muddy. Then I dipped into the plum shade and I really tried to build that up on the outer corner of the eye. You can build it up, but it takes a little bit. You definitely want to use maybe like a goat hair brush, something a little bit more dense to really grab the pigment if you want to pack it on. If you go in with a fluffier brush, you're going to get something really soft and diffused. And then finally, I used the pearly shade to brighten up the inner corner and just a little bit on the lower lash line. And lastly, I dipped into the icy blue, and once again, I use that as just like a little bit of a topper. It does add kind of a beautiful iridescence just to the center of the eye. So this is final look number 2. Let me know what you think of this one. Which one do you prefer? I actually prefer look number 1. I feel like it's a little bit unique, but I do appreciate the wearability and just kind of more classic nature of look number 2. As I alluded to in the beginning of this video, Dior has come out with quite a few purple tone palettes within the past year. So before I share my final thoughts on the eyeshadow, I am going to show you a quick comparison between the Smoky Essentials palette and the Silver Essentials palette. I believe this was the holiday release last year that was incredibly popular. Right here I have the Celestial Purple, and here is the Smoky Essentials palette. You'll see that this one is definitely, it's more neutral. It's more like mauves, plums, cool tone neutrals. You can build up more depth with this palette, whereas the Celestial Purple, it has more pops of color. You have the silver in there. It's kind of a mixture of like cool, warm, and neutral shades. So you have a little bit more options. I feel like you can kind of go a couple of different directions with the Celestial Purple. Overall, you don't really have those pops of color in Smoky Essentials. And then we have the Silver Essentials palette. This one overall is going to be cooler in tone. It's going to be frostier. It definitely gives a very wintry look. I feel like the Celestial Purple, it gives you more options. I think it's a little bit more versatile for all year round. This is very much, while I love this palette, it's very much one type of look, like very silver paired with lilacs and plums, whereas with this one, as I showed you, you can go a little bit more neutral. You can experiment with the purple shades, or you could just do like a soft brown. You have more options. It's a little bit more versatile. Overall, friends, I do like this palette. I like the looks that I created with it. It's not my favorite Dior palette ever because I do tend to like the ones that have a very strong color story, like the Silver Essentials. Like I just know in my head, if that's the kind of look I'm going for, I'm gonna reach for the Silver Essentials palette, if that makes sense. But I have a lot of eyeshadow palettes. I think that if I was just like a regular consumer who didn't buy every single new release to review on my YouTube channel, I think I would appreciate this palette once again, just because you do have a lot of different directions you can go in. You can go the neutral route, you can play around with the purples, you can go this cool tone frosty route. I don't think I have any other palettes that are exactly like this. So there's some uniqueness to it, but there's also, you can create everyday looks. There's a lot of versatility. So I definitely appreciate that about this. Don't expect any insane pigmentation from this palette. I mean, it's Dior. If you're used to buying Dior, whether it's the Backstage line or the regular line, I don't think there's going to be any big surprises here. Personally, I would appreciate if these two deeper shades had more pigmentation. I feel like, at least for me and the types of looks that I like to create, it would just make things a little bit easier, although I am able to eventually get there in the end. But I do have a lot of subscribers that they just like sheer shades like that. They don't want a lot of pigmentation. They don't want to be afraid of maybe ruining their eye look when they're getting ready to go out. So if you like something that's a little bit sheer and more buildable, then that's not going to be a con for you. Honestly, I think the thing I like the least about this palette is that it just seems a little bit repetitive. I feel like there's so many different directions that Dior could go in. I mean, blues are very popular right now. Kind of olivey greens are really popular right now. I just feel like there were other directions we could go in. Just taking a look at those other two palettes that were recently released, it's not like they're super similar, but it is more purples. I'm like, come on, Dior, what are you doing? There's other directions that we could have gone in. I would love to hear your thoughts down below. And now let's move on to the highlighter palette. Now, I love eyeshadow, but this really is the product that I was the most excited about because, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, they have not released one of these in a hot second. I really, really like the two that I purchased years ago. I use them all the time. I always recommend these palettes in like the Sephora sales and other favorites videos. I like this formula. It's kind of like a baked gelée formula, so I was curious what this one was going to be like. So I'll show you guys once again some daylight close-ups and swatches of this palette. This one is called number 006 Celestial Glow, and you'll see that we have a white, very glittery shade there at the top. Then we have more of like a softer coral and a softer rose highlighter, and then the one at the bottom, it's called Icy Blue. I don't know if I would say it's a blue. I guess to me it looked a little bit, maybe a little bit more like a lilac. It does have like a really beautiful shift. The two white shades are a little bit more on the glittery side. I'll show you what they actually look like on the skin in just a second. And then the two more pigmented shades are going to be a lot softer. Let's start off with the application of the white glitter shade. I will say, I like this a lot more than I thought I would, but I just think in general, this is way too glittery for every day for me. I actually think a lot of my subscribers are not going to like this particular shade. I feel like it looked good, especially with the eye look, but it's a lot of glitter. It's a lot of glitter for one look. I do really like this shade as an eyeshadow topper, and so I think that's what I'm gonna be using this for. Grabbing this palette when I'm ready to kind of like highlight, add some brightness, kind of finish up my makeup look, and then I'm gonna use that as my little topper finisher shade for my eyes. And then for contrast, on my other cheek, I applied the Icy Blue shade, and I like this one a lot more than I thought I was going to. It actually melted into the skin really beautifully. When I swatched it on my hand, I thought, this might be a little bit too glittery, but I actually really like it. And because the shift is very subtle, it doesn't look too crazy. I actually think it's a really fun highlighter. I'm really looking forward to using this one. If you have a deeper skin tone, I do think it's going to look rather frosty. But once again, I think it would be a really beautiful eyeshadow shade as well. Now, as I mentioned before, the peachy and pink shades in this palette, they are not glittery at all. They are much softer, more subdued. They just kind of more like melt into my skin. The peachy shade in particular is a great shade for me if I want something super duper subtle, but I really like the rose shade for just something a little bit different. I don't know if I have a light pink highlighter that is this natural. I certainly have the one from the Dior Forever Couture line. That one is a little bit more blingy, and I'm going to show you in comparison in a second. This is going to be more subtle than the ones in the Dior Backstage line. These are the other two Dior Backstage highlighter palettes that I'm going to be comparing for you all. First up, we have my beloved, as you can see, 001 Universal. I love this palette. I mostly use the two lighter shades, and then the two deeper ones are kind of more like toppers and eyeshadow shades for me. And then some of you may have this palette. Unfortunately, it was limited edition, but this is the rose gold one that they launched years ago. So I'm going to be showing you guys the swatch comparisons of all three of these. First, there on the left, we have the new one, Celestial Glow. Then in the center is the 001 Universal. And then on the right, we have the rose gold. Notice how the 001 Universal, it is a lot more metallic, more pigmented. If you want something that packs a little bit more of a punch, I would probably go with that one. Also, if you have a deeper skin tone, I think that one is the way to go, especially because you have such a brighter, more pigmented pink and then the bronze shade in there. I find the pink shade in that palette, I like it, but I can't really use it as a highlighter. So I actually really like the one in the Celestial Glow palette. I was thinking that maybe Celestial Glow was going to be more blingy and dazzly, but it's really just that one glitter shade that is kind of doing the most compared to these other ones. I think that the Celestial Glow is actually more similar to the rose gold one. Obviously the tones are a little bit different, but if you kind of always wanted that rose gold one, or if that one's more of your vibe, I think you're going to enjoy the Celestial Glow. All in all, I actually really like this highlighter palette. When I first opened it up and I was swatching it, I wasn't so sure because once again, this shade is very glittery, but I think this one might actually be my favorite one that I've tried so far. I haven't tried the Glitz one that is still available, but I've heard that one is also quite glittery, so I never picked it up. This is my favorite one that I've tried so far. These three shades all work very well for my skin tone. They do add a little bit of something different to my collection because like they're subtle, but they still have like some interesting tones. I like that they're all within one palette. I can use them on my eyes, and I'm really not bothered by the fact that this one is super glittery because once again, I can just kind of pop that one on my eyes as a topper. So I actually really like this one. If you have more of like a fairer skin tone, I would check this one out. And then once again, if you're more like tan to deep, check out the one from the main line, the Universal. And that is it. Thank you for hanging out with me today and hearing all my thoughts on these new products from Dior Backstage. If you like this video, please do not forget to give me a big thumbs up. It really helps me out, and better yet, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of both of these products. Are you thinking of picking them up? Do you feel like they're redundant? I would love to hear all of your thoughts. Subscribe if you haven't already because I post new videos just like this one every single week. And with that, friends, I hope that you see some beauty in your day, and I will see you in my next one. Goodbye.